Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. Free agency is officially underway as of the taping of this podcast. It's 3:01 p.m. Central Time, which means that the new league year has begun. Greg, we got transactions all over the place, and it's always a fun time of year for fans to see which players are going to land in different spots, but certainly fun to imagine how the coaching staffs of these various teams are going to use their new players.
You know what I'm most excited about, Buck?
Tell me about it.
I just finished my 5th book of the off season. That's what I'm most excited about.
What? Okay, let's do a quick book review. What are you reading?
Just one of my favorite authors. Robert Cray has a character named Elvis Cole. Private Eye, probably about 20 books with the character. I've read them all in order. I just read the most recent one called Racing the Light.
Racing the Light. See, I don't know what it is, Greg. Maybe it's just generally the no-nonsense approach that you take to your profession, but I didn't have you as a fiction guy.
Oh, I love detective novels, mysteries, police procedurals, lawyer stuff. I love that stuff.
Interesting. 5th book of the offseason, Greg. We haven't had time to slow down.
I'm grinding. Yeah, I'm grinding in everything I do, Buck. I'm a little nuts,
All right. It makes a lot of sense now. It's all coming together.
I know. It's all coming together.
So for the Titans, they're trying to put it back together. That's kind of the objective of this offseason. And a couple of different signings, Greg. One I'd like to start with in particular, given that they have not yet officially released Bud Dupree, but that is going to come down at some point today. Arden Key, in the absence of both Dupree and DeMarcus Walker, who signed with the Bears. What do you like about the former Jacksonville Jaguar who gave this team all kinds of hell this last season?
Really liked Arden Key, going back to when he was with the Niners a few years ago. We saw the same thing in Jacksonville this year. He's multi-positional. You can line him up inside. You can line him up outside. He's got length. He's got quickness. He's a good pass rusher. I think he's one of those guys that, you don't think about because he's not going to get 15 or 18 sacks, but he's a really valuable piece of a defensive front with his position versatility. And I think that length is really important. You probably remember being in SEC country coming out of LSU. When he got to LSU, he was supposed to be, the next guy. I mean, LSU has a lot of guys who are the next guy. Sure. But, and if I remember correctly, he had a really good first year at LSU, and it didn't quite work out where he was an oh my God kind of player. And if I recall, the Raiders drafted him, I believe.
Yep.
And then he ended up with the Niners, where he started to come together. Then he left there, went to Jacksonville for a year, and had a really good year in the same way that he had the good year or two with the Niners, playing inside and outside. And I think that's a really positive signing, and again, I don't want people to think, and I hope people don't think that because we do this, that I'm a homer, but I'm just going by tape study. I think Arden Key is a really solid multi-positional player that will help this defensive front.
Which is what they're trying to do, right? That's, I think, the same kind of logic with Azeez Al-Shaair, the linebacker that they added from San Francisco, who's been stuck behind Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner, but getting opportunities because of injury in the last couple of seasons, really has potential here.
And when the Niners played their base defense, which was a 4-3, Al-Shaair was the third linebacker. But due to injury, because Greenlaw's been injured the last couple of years, I don't know if Warner's missed many games, but Al-Shaair was the guy who would then play, in their nickel. So he's got a lot of experience in this league. He's another guy who's a solid football. Everybody wants sexy, free agent signings. There's only a few of those when you get right down to it. Then the rest becomes building a team. Yeah. And again, no one knows I'm looking at my calendar, on the Ides of March, as it were, March 15th, if I remember my Shakespeare correctly. No one knows that for sure, what's going to happen on March 15th once we start a football season. But normally teams end up getting built with solid foundations. And I think Key fits that. I think Al-Shaair fits that. And, he will start for this team. Obviously, they lost David Long. And they decided clearly they were not going, Zach Cunningham, they released. So they need linebackers. The hope, of course, is that Rice becomes relatively a full-time player and that Shaair and Rice can be the guys. I assume that's the hope. You would know more than I am being there. I'm not, but I think that would be what the plan is. The hope is. But Alshier's another really solid foundation piece.
Well, it's what I think smart teams have to do at this time of year, Greg, because nobody declared the Chiefs the winners of free agency last year, right?
Right,
In fact,
right,
it was all about
right.
Tyreek Hill leaving, and oh my God,
Right,
what are they
right.
going to do without him? And all they did was bring in Juju Smith-Schuster. What do you mean? And there they sit. Now there's one particular player on the Chiefs roster that nobody else has, which kind of skews
Yeah.
things in their advantage from time to
So
time. But still, I think to emphasize the practicality part of free agency rather than these big splash signings, that's what I think fans get caught up in the shuffle the most about, because of course they want to see their team
yeah,
sign players who they know.
I think when you get a new GM, and obviously Rand Carthon came from the Niners, and they're a successful franchise. Before that he was with the Rams, and we know he was with Coach Mack. So there's a relationship there. I'm sure they talk a good amount, and they talk about team building and the stuff that football people talk about. And I think Rand Carthon probably knows that it doesn't all happen overnight. And very often we know fans, and that's wonderful about fans. That's why you and I can talk, and hopefully people listen. But you've got to build solid foundations first and foremost. And when you're a team that I think most people would say, needs a little course correction, whatever that means, for different people. That doesn't necessarily happen with one player. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens through the different ways you can do it. Free agency is one. Ideally, they draft well. That's the other way. And then slowly but surely, you start sort of, brick by brick, mortar by mortar, you start building back up. And I think, you need solid foundation players. And I think, we haven't even mentioned Andre Dillard, who was a first round pick of the Eagles, and obviously, did not win the starting left tackle job a couple of years ago over Jordan Mailata. But, the Eagles really did not want to get rid of him. Now he became a free agent, so they had no choice. And, he will start at left tackle. And we'll see how he does. He came out of was it Washington or Washington State? I forget. But I know he's from out that
I
way.
believe Washington State, but I'll double
Yeah,
check.
I think you're right. And coached by clearly one of the better O-line coaches in the NFL, Jeff Stoutland, with the Eagles, and now he'll be the starting left tackle for the Titans. And I don't think I'd be speaking out of school by saying that's going to be an upgrade over what we saw this past year. And I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but it will be an upgrade. And
No,
that's what you're trying to do.
right. They're trying to build contingency plans on top of just filling in starting spots right now, because they have theoretically 8 starters that they're going to have to replace in some form or fashion in Tennessee. And you were correct, Greg. Washington State is where.
And by the way, Buck, I don't mean to interrupt, but I hope people understand that you're not going to fill every single role with a great player.
No.
It doesn't work that way. When a team has that many starting positions to fill, and players and positions that, even if they have a player that they'd like to upgrade, it doesn't all happen in one year.
Yeah,
so,
which is kind of where the route that I think I was going down with Daniel Brunskill, for example, the offensive lineman,
another guy
from San Francisco, who has played multiple positions along the offensive line, has had good success in San Francisco, played a lot of snaps for them last year. And I think they're trying to put themselves in a position to have players that they know can play, and supplement that with whatever talent that they're able to acquire in the draft, because just because they have Dillard and Brunskill doesn't mean they couldn't go offensive line still in the first round.
No, but you just made a great point. They know Brunskill can line up and play. Now, this year, Brunskill was a rotational player with a draft choice, Spencer Burford, at right guard for the Niners. So obviously, they didn't think Brunskill was good enough to be the full-time starter, but he was a full-time starter the previous 2 years.
Right.
So you're talking about a player with a lot of NFL experience, and you can line up and play with Daniel Brunskill. Like you said, it doesn't mean he's an all-pro. It doesn't mean we're getting the gold jacket ready. but you can line up and play with him. And, at this point, you're trying to get as many players like that as possible. And then you hope that you grab the bright star along the way, maybe in the draft, because they're going to get a decent, they have a first round pick, right? The Titans this year?
11th overall.
Yeah. So obviously you've got to hit that. Now again, hit that is a relative term. You hope you hit it with an all-pro Hall of Famer. We'll see how that plays out. But the point is, whoever they pick at 11 has to be a starter.
Yes, and that's they're trying to supplement that in as many ways as humanly possible. Teams that have made quote unquote splashes, Greg, at least with some name brand players going from one club to another. Miami, who got David Long, the inside linebacker from the Titans, on a very, very cost-effective deal.
Yep.
Traded for Jalen Ramsey to supplement what I assume they're losing in Byron Jones when they end up ultimately releasing him. This is a team in Miami that has a lot of promise, I think, that we saw last year, and obviously a super gifted offensive play caller in their head coach, Mike McDaniel. Are those moves still practical while also kind of qualifying as splash moves in free agency and trades and the like?
Well, I think they feel, assuming health of Tua, that they've got a really good offense, because they did have a really good offense, and you have to assume it's only going to get better with another year in Mike McDaniel's system. With the same players, you can always then start building off the foundation that you created a year ago. So they feel their offense, I'm sure, is really good. So now they want to be really good on defense, and they change coordinators. So now, if you have two corners that you feel you can line up and play man to man, and by the way, I'm sure Ramsey's thrilled, because we saw how he was used with the Rams. Contrary to what a lot of people might think, the Rams were a very low percentage man to man defense. And we know that Ramsey played very often what they call that star position, where he was essentially a slot player.
Right.
And he wants to play man to man on the outside, and he's going to get that opportunity with the Dolphins. And he'll play opposite Xavier Howard, who's also a very good man-to-man corner. So, and then they've got Javon Holland, who's a young safety who's emerging as one of the better safeties in this league. So, now they probably feel, hey, you can line up on the outside and play man with two corners. Most teams don't have two. They have two. That allows you to really be multiple with what you can do with your fronts and your pressures. And every team would like to be in that situation. And they've got Vic Fangio, and he's pretty smart.
Yeah, he's certainly Miami's going to be. I mean, it was a fascinating watch last year. Obviously, down the stretch, injuries derailed them, but certainly setting up for a promising 2023 campaign. Greg, we haven't done a podcast since the Combine because you were gracious enough to let me have a week of vacation while you read your fifth and sixth book of the offseason.
My fifth one. Yes. But I've been grinding away watching tape as well, Buck,
Well, I took a week off from the grind. I went to the mountains for a little while, but there's been a lot of quarterback movement since we last talked. Derek Carr to the Saints. You've got Jimmy Garoppolo in Las Vegas. Baker Mayfield agreed to terms with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers today. Are any of the quarterback moves at this point, and of course Carolina trading up to that number 1 overall spot to get involved with the quarterback draft. Is there any of the quarterback movement thus far that's kind of piqued your interest as far as what the coaching staff will be able to do with them in their new landing spots?
Has general manager Aaron Rodgers signed quarterback Aaron Rodgers yet?
Not well. He kind of did today on McAfee. No, I don't know what the hell he did today, Greg. I'll be honest with you. He said it's not going to be a news day, and he said it's been my intention since Friday to play for the Jets. So that's probably the one, isn't it?
Yeah, the one that we could talk about all of these in detail, but the one that I think is really interesting because I think it's a good fit. I really like Jimmy Garoppolo with Josh McDaniels.
Okay.
Because Jimmy Garoppolo has really been, I think, a little better than maybe he's given credit for. Yeah, no one's suggesting, nor am I, that he's a top 5 quarterback in the league. But as we may have discussed over the years, he's was asked with the Niners to make a lot of tough throws between the numbers, between the hashes. And I'm not sure people realize how tough those throws are. And I think with Josh McDaniels, where there's theoretically a lot of option routes, a lot of choice routes, so, I think Jimmy Garoppolo can make those kinds of throws effectively. He's a veteran quarterback. He's been in the league a long time. Don't forget, he was with New England when Josh McDaniels was there. So it's not something that's totally new to him at all. I was kind of surprised, I guess, that I don't know why Darren Waller, why they felt that they needed to trade him. There's always a reason, they're not going to announce it publicly. But they have Devontae Adams. They signed Jacoby Myers, who obviously Josh McDaniels knows as well. So there's a lot of familiarity here. And I'm kind of intrigued by how that's going to play out. Now I'm curious to see what happens with Josh Jacobs, who remains unsigned.
Yeah, well, Josh Jacobs expressed his opinion on the Darren Waller trade on social media, but we'll leave that for Twitter people to discuss.
Yes, but you know what happens with that kind of stuff too? Normally, a big contract can soothe that a little bit as well. So if the contract ends up being the biggest from the Raiders, my guess is he'll get over that.
Money doesn't fix everything, but it fixes a lot of things, turns out. You bring up the Darren Waller trade. He goes to the New York Giants, Greg. They obviously re-signed Daniel Jones on a lucrative contract. They are tagging Saquon Barkley, so he will be in New York for the time being, and they're bringing back a couple of their veteran wide receivers that have been in place there for some time. What do you I guess, how does Waller factor into the offense that Brian Daboll will run with Daniel Jones, or is it too early to say at this point?
It's probably too early to say exactly what will happen, other than the fact that we know Waller is a tight end that can line up anywhere in the formation. He's not just a guy that's going to, be an attached tight end. You can line him up anywhere. You can line him up as your boundary X, the single receiver to the short side of the field, on the back side of trips, 3 receivers. You can move him all over. And, and believe it or not, a lot of people might not think about this because Daniel Jones hasn't put up big numbers in the NFL. But ultimately, Daniel Jones is a pretty good thrower of the football, and he has no problem throwing the ball between the numbers. And Waller can certainly work between the numbers. So, I think it remains to be seen the specifics of how that will play out. But now they can line up with 12 personnel as well, because Daniel Bellinger, who's not really a number 1 tight end, but is a very solid tight end, who was a rookie this past year, gives the Giants the ability to line up with 2 tight ends.
So teams will continue to make signings. Obviously, there's transactions flying as we tape the podcast right now. Not everything we're going to be able to cover on today's podcast or keep up with at this point necessarily. But Greg, we haven't talked since the combine ended, and a week in Indianapolis is good for the soul, if not for the if not for the dietary plans, for the amount of steak that we tend to eat up there. But what did you what I guess were your post-combine kind of takeaways from the conversations that you were able to have? I know you sit down with a lot of people throughout the NFL during the course of your week there, and obviously the prospects, we were able to attend a lot of the workouts. I'm sure you had better access than most at these things. What was kind of your general assessment of the week that we spent in Indianapolis?
I really enjoyed it this year. I mean, as you know, I get a chance to go down on the field, and it's really, I just like seeing the players up close. I have great conversations, had a lot of great conversations with different people about a lot of different things. Obviously it's the quarterbacks and the receivers are something I'm particularly interested in. But this year, the DBs I got a chance to see this year, because normally I don't. Normally I'm gone on that last day. So I really did get a chance to see the DBs, and I really enjoyed that as well. But no, you learn a lot. Obviously there's certain players that really stood out. I'm very curious now to see what happens with the number 1 pick in the draft with Carolina.
Right.
Because obviously, Anthony Richardson, who's just his general size and what he looks like and his combine performance was really, really good. Not nowhere near what his tape shows. His tape is not really that good overall. So we'll see. It would not, again, I have no inside information. It would not surprise me if Anthony Richardson ends up being the number one pick in the draft.
Well, I mean, we knew he was going to test insanely well. Now, how well he ended up doing is a credit to him, obviously, and he's got a particular set of athletic gifts that I'm sure almost any athlete, regardless of position, is jealous of. But in seeing, I guess the thing for me watching Richardson, Greg, is I was curious about him going out there and throwing, just generally, because it's a different setting than pro days where you're working with your quarterback coach, you're working with your wide receivers that you're in a more sanitized environment rather than, all right, you're out there with coach X, Y, and Z. You don't know these receivers, and they're asking you which kind of routes and which kind of passes to throw. I thought, given routes on air is what it is, but I was curious to watch him, and I thought, on the whole, I was pleased with what I saw from Anthony Richardson. I'm sure scouts felt the same.
No, he looked very, very good. And he threw the ball very well.
Right.
And there's a wow element to the way he throws a football. There was just a wow element to what he looked like, Buck. And obviously running a 4.4, I think it was a 4.44 40, at 6'4 plus and 244 pounds is pretty impressive. So no, there was a wow element to what he did at the combine. And, it's a very interesting sort of quarterback discussion with the idea of the spectacular and the special versus the routine, and maybe I'm old school, but the routine I still think is important in the NFL when you're a quarterback. When it's 3rd and 7, sometimes an 8-yard throw is a really good play.
Right.
And the one thing when you watch Anthony Richardson's tape, and I actually got this term from Phil Simms, and I love it. And I told Phil I was going to steal it, is, Anthony Richardson struggles to control the ball. And if you can't control the ball when you throw it, it's hard to be a great quarterback, no matter how impressive your overall physical traits are.
Yeah. One of the comments that he made in in these media scrum settings are not end all be all, obviously, but just to hear him talk about the accuracy issues that he has experienced, and his answer basically being, well, if I throw it hard enough, I don't have a problem controlling where the ball goes.
Right.
I was like, yeah. I mean, I guess you're right, but in the NFL, it's going to be a little bit of a different circumstance.
Yeah, and but obviously the spectacular nature is there. He's going to make unbelievable throws. He obviously can run. I mean, we saw that this past year. 80-yard touchdown run versus LSU, 60-yard touchdown run versus A&M. We saw that he has the capability of doing those kinds of things. The question is, can he make the layups?
Yeah, and certainly we're a long way off from being able to answer those questions at this point, but we've got plenty more to talk about in the meantime. Greg, I appreciate you spending some time. As always, we'll talk a little bit more about how teams shaped up in free agency next week, and certainly start to dive into some of these draft prospects, because there's a lot of fun players in this draft that we have even yet to scratch the surface on, and we've got a couple months to do so at this point.
I'm trying, Buck. I'm trying to watch as many as I can,
Well, maybe if you quit taking so much time for yourself and reading books, Greg, we could get more done around here. I don't know.
Ah.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Buck.